Welcome to the Playing Books podcast.
It's really great to be here.
Today we're doing something a little different. We're not just skimming a topic or looking at a summary. We are dedicating this entire episode to one single, massive, monumental work of history.
A truly beautiful one, too.
It is. We're talking about a book that captures what is, well, arguably the most explosive, rapid, and frankly terrifying period of human innovation. I'm talking about flight, the Complete History of Aviation, DK, Definitive Visual Histories, by R.G. Grant.
And definitive is absolutely the right word for what R.G. Grant has done here. This isn't just a list of, dates and wingspans, though. All of that is in there.
Oh, it's all in there.
It is. But he's compiled the human narrative. It's a visual and a textual journey through what might just be the most rapid technological evolution our species has ever seen or ever will.
That is exactly the hook that just grabbed me when I first cracked the spine on this book. You look at the timeline that's presented.
It's mind-bending.
It really is.
Yeah.
R.G. Grant lays it out, and you realize that within a single century, just 100 years, which is really just one human lifetime, humanity went from crashing these frail little crafts made of wood and fabric onto sand dunes to jet travel being completely second nature.
And landing on the moon. Don't forget landing on the moon.
Exactly. From hopping, a few feet off the ground in a glorified kite to walking on the surface of another world. All in a time frame that some people actually live through from start to finish.
It's extraordinary. My grandfather saw the first cars in his town, and he also watched the moon landing on TV. It's that same compression of history.
My great-grandfather saw the horse and buggy, and he saw the Saturn V rocket. It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. Because if you think about the pace of other technologies like maritime travel or even the wheel, they took millennia to evolve.
Sure. Thousands of years.
We had sailboats for thousands of years before we finally put an engine on them. Aviation did it in a blink. It went from impossible to mundane before we could even catch our breath.
And R.G. Grant opens the book in the foreword and the introduction by touching on this deep, almost primal human impulse. He talks about the age of envy.
Which is such a great phrase, isn't it?
It's perfect. For centuries, millennia even, humans have just been looking up, watching the birds.
Watching the birds with admiration and envy, as the text puts it. And I think that's just the perfect way to describe it. It wasn't just, scientific curiosity. It was jealousy.
Yeah, pure jealousy.
We were stuck in the mud. We're heavy, slow, two-dimensional creatures. And we look up and we see these animals moving in 3 dimensions with total, absolute freedom. We want it up there.
And that desire is so deeply rooted in our mythology. You can't really discuss the history of flight without touching on the foundational metaphor that Grant brings up right at the start, the myth of Daedalus and Icarus.
The classic cautionary tale. It's really the blueprint for everything that follows in this entire book.
Yeah, for those of us who might have slept through high school Greek mythology, maybe lay it out for us.
Well, you have Daedalus. He's the brilliant craftsman, the engineer. He makes wings out of feathers and wax.
Right.
It's the perfect blend of, primitive technology and these incredibly high aspirations. He's the first aeronautical engineer, really. But then you have Icarus.
The pilot.
The pilot. The young, reckless user of the technology. And Daedalus warns him, don't fly too low, or the sea spray will clog up the wings. Don't fly too high, or the sun will melt the wax.
But Icarus is human. He gets caught up in the moment.
Exactly. He gets up there, he feels that glory of being a man, as D'Annunzio would say much later, and he just keeps going up. He flies too close to the sun. The wax melts, the feathers fall apart, and he plunges to his doom.
Wow.
It's the ultimate symbol of hubris. And as we go through R.G. Grant's book today, we are going to see that exact dynamic play out over and over and over again. The tension between the technology, the wax and feathers, or later the engines and aluminum, and the risk of that human hubris.
So here's our mission for this episode. We're going to unpack the stories, the incredible quotes, and the visual history that's recorded by R.G. Grant in Flight, the Complete History of Aviation. We're going to walk through the timeline, from the dreamers all the way to the jet age.
And we want to challenge you, the listener, right now. As we discuss these pioneers, these people who risked literally everything for what Orville Wright himself called a wavy, creeping flight, ask yourself a question.
What's that?
How can you let these ideas of persistence, of courage, in the face of absolute ridicule, enhance your own life today?
Because, let's be honest, most of us aren't strapping ourselves into experimental gliders made of spruce and canvas.
I would hope not.
But we all have our own version of what the book calls a trackless wilderness to navigate.
Absolutely. We all have a project that looks impossible. We all have skeptics who say it can't be done.
So let's get into it. Section 1, The Prehistory of Flight and the Dreamers. The book calls this the Age of Envy. We talked about watching birds, but there was a long, long time where it's all we could do.
That's right. Before engines, before aerodynamics was even a word, you just had this era of pure speculation. And the book, of course, highlights Leonardo da Vinci here.
The Renaissance man himself. I always picture him with those sketchbooks, drawing these intricate helicopters that couldn't possibly fly.
Leonardo was obsessed with birds. He truly believed that if you studied them closely enough, you could reverse engineer their secrets. He drew up these incredible concepts for flying machines. You've seen the ornithopters.
The ones with the wings that flap.
Right. But flight, the complete history of aviation, points out a really critical flaw in that early thinking. A flaw that actually held aviation back for centuries.
And what was that flaw?
They were focused entirely on flapping.
So biomimicry gone wrong.
Exactly. Da Vinci and the other thinkers of that time, they were trying to replicate bird flight directly. They thought human muscle power could flap a set of artificial wings.
So they designed these complex pulley systems where a pilot would lie down and use their arms and their legs to beat the wings.
Like doing a bench press just to stay in the sky. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But as R.G. Grant notes, that was a complete dead end. It was totally impractical. Humans just don't have the power-to-weight ratio to flap our way into the sky. A bird has these massive chest muscles relative to its body size. A human, we are heavy, we're dense, and we're frankly pretty weak compared to a bird.
It's funny to think about, isn't it? Arguably the smartest man in history, stumped because he was too focused on mimicking nature exactly, rather than looking for a new mechanical solution.
He was trying to build a mechanical bird instead of an airplane.
Yeah.
It took a fundamental shift in perspective to move forward. We had to stop looking at the flapping and start looking at the soaring. And that shift really starts to happen in the late 19th century with what the book calls the glider era.
This is where we meet some of the real unsung heroes. The book introduces us to a man named Octave Chanute.
A crucial figure. And what's interesting is that he wasn't some young dreamer. He was a retired railway engineer. He brought a very practical, structural mindset to the problem.
The book describes these experiments on the sand dunes of Lake Michigan in the summer of 1896. Can you just imagine that scene?
Oh, wow.
It's hot. There's sand everywhere. The wind is just whipping off the lake. And you have these guys in suits running down dunes with these fragile, bizarre contraptions.
And Chanute was different because he was moving away from flapping. He developed something called the triplane glider. This was a fixed wing structure. This is the key evolution.
The fixed wing.
He was starting to understand that you need a rigid surface to generate lift, not a flapping wing. And he used bridge building techniques, trussing and wire bracing to make the wings light but also strong.
He was standing on the shoulders of others too, right? The book mentions Louis-Pierre Mouillard.
Yes, his 1881 book, The Empire of the Air.
What a title. The Empire of the Air. It sounds like something out of Jules Verne.
It does. Mouillard was another one of these bird observers, a Frenchman living in Cairo watching vultures. But his work inspired the next generation, including the Wright brothers, to look at the shape of the wing, the curve, the camber, rather than the flap. He realized that the birds weren't flapping all the time, they were just riding the currents.
But let's not pretend this was all, serious science being celebrated by the public. R.G. Grant paints a really vivid picture of the oddball inventors.
The oddballs, yes. This is the section of the book where you really, really need the visuals.
I love this part. You just get this mental image of these ungainly steam-powered flying machines.
We are talking about the era of Hiram Maxim and Clement Ader. These men were trying to skip the gliding phase entirely and go straight to powered flight, but they were using the only technology they had, steam engines.
Imagine a cast iron boiler, a firebox full of coal, water. All of that strapped to a canvas kite.
It was heavy. It was unbelievably complicated. And they mostly just, sat there or fell over. Maxim built this machine that was so powerful it actually lifted up on its rails, but it was completely uncontrollable.
So if it had actually flown.
He would have died instantly, no question.
And the public ridicule must have been intense. You have to remember, for the average person in the 19th century, flight was a fantasy. It was for dreamers and lunatics.
Oh, absolutely. If you told your neighbor you were building a flying machine in your barn, they wouldn't think you were a genius. They'd think you had lost your mind.
I want to ask the listener to just pause and imagine that. Imagine the skepticism. We are so used to technology just working now. New tech comes out, we buy it. We assume that if someone says, I'm building a teleportation device, well, maybe they will. But back then,
Back then, if you were working on flight, you were fighting against the consensus of reality itself.
would you have believed it was possible if you saw one of these things?
That's a tough question. It's so easy to say yes now, but when you see a steam engine that weighs 2 tons trying to lift itself off the ground, I think skepticism was probably the most rational response. The scientific community had largely decided that heavier-than-air flight was mathematically impossible.
Until it wasn't. Which brings us to section 2, the Wright brothers. And the phrase the book uses here is just beautiful, the exquisite smoothness.
This is the turning point, 1903 to 1905, the moment the world changed, even if the world didn't actually know it yet.
We all know the story, or at least we think we do. 2 brothers, bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Kitty Hawk. But R.G. Grant gives us the details that make it real. He talks about that historic image. You know, the one, the John Daniels photograph.
It's one of the most famous photos of the 20th century, maybe the most famous.
Orville is at the controls, lying prone on the lower wing, and Wilbur is caught mid-stride, running alongside, watching in this moment of just amazement, holding his cap so it doesn't blow off.
And what I love about the book's coverage of this is how it strips away the mythology to show the reality of that day. We tend to think of that first flight as this soaring, eagle-like moment, you know, a grand triumph of the human spirit.
Right, the swelling orchestral music moment, the big Hollywood shot.
But listen to the quote from Orville Wright that R.G. Grant includes in the book. Orville said, "It was only a flight of 12 seconds, and it was an uncertain, wavy, creeping sort of flight. But it was a real flight at last."
Uncertain, wavy, creeping, that is not how they show it in the movies.
Not at all. It was a struggle. It was barely controlled chaos. The machine was pitching up and down violently. But, as he said, it was a real flight. It wasn't a glide. They generated their own power, they sustained it against the wind, and they landed at the same elevation they started from. That was the definition.
I just love the humility in that quote. He's not bragging. He's not making some grand pronouncement. He's just stating the facts. It was creeping, but we did it.
And that humility is so key to their character. But the world didn't really pay attention immediately. In fact, for 5 years, almost no one believed them. They went back to Dayton, Ohio, and just kept practicing in a cow pasture called Huffman Prairie.
The 5-year gap.
Exactly. The Europeans, the French especially, were calling them liars. Blue furs, they said. If these bicycle mechanics can fly, why don't they show us?
Which leads to, I think, the single greatest I told you so moment in all of history. The turning point. Le Mans, France, 1908.
This is such a cinematic scene in the text. Wilbur Wright goes to France. He ships the flyer over in crates. He assembles it himself at the Grenadiers racetrack. The French press is there. The skeptics are there. They are ready to tear him apart.
And the visual detail R.G. Grant provides here is just hilarious to me.
Yeah.
You expect a daredevil, right? A guy in a leather jacket, scarf blowing in the wind, goggles, looking like a hero.
But Wilbur Wright.
The book describes him wearing a gray business suit, a high-starched collar, and a golf cap.
He looked like a phlegmatic businessman. He looked like he was about to audit a bank, not conquer the air. He was quiet, unsmiling. He didn't wave to the crowd. He just walked around his machine, checking wires, checking the engine.
And the French press. Oh, the French press. They had no idea what to make of him. The book quotes Le Matin, a French newspaper. They compared Wilbur to a defender of ancient Gaul.
A defender of ancient Gaul? Why?
Because of his long and powerful drooping whiskers.
That's fantastic.
Oh,
That's just perfect.
They were expecting a showman, and they got this guy with a mustache and a business suit. They were actively mocking him right up until the moment he started the engine.
And then he took off, and that is when the laughter stopped. He didn't just hop, he banked, he turned circles, he flew figure eights. The French aviators at the time could only really fly in straight lines, and they were fighting the controls the whole time. Wilbur was flying with total, effortless control.
The reaction was immediate. The crowd went wild. The book says men were actually weeping. The skeptics publicly apologized. But the book also notes that Britain, specifically, had a moment of terrifying clarity.
Yes. This is where the military implication hits home like a hammer. Britain was the world's greatest naval power. They were an island fortress. For centuries, the English Channel was a moat that no army could cross.
Right.
But watching Wilbur Wright fly loops over a French racetrack, the British observers realized that the Navy could no longer defend them against an aerial attack. The mode of the English Channel suddenly didn't matter if you could just fly over it.
It changed the geopolitical map instantly.
Yeah.
Borders became sort of irrelevant in the third dimension, but it also changed the human experience.
Mhm.
The book quotes the Italian poet Gabriele D'Annunzio, who flew as a passenger in 1909.
This quote just captures the romantic side of it so perfectly.
He said, "Until now, I have never really lived. It is in the air that one feels the glory of being a man."
And he talks about the exquisite smoothness of the motion.
The joy of gliding through space. It sounds almost spiritual.
But, the book also grounds this romance in the physical mechanics of it. It wasn't just sitting there and enjoying the view. The pilot was definitely not feeling exquisite smoothness.
No, not at all. The text describes the physical act of flying these early machines. It mentions joggling the rudder bar with your feet just to keep the machine straight.
Joggling.
It was a constant physical engagement. You were literally wrestling the air. There was no autopilot. There was no hydraulic assist. The cables went straight from your hands and feet to the wings and the rudder. If a gust of wind hit the wing, it yanked your arm.
It sounds absolutely exhausting.
It was, which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the early craze and the Knights of the Air. Because joggling a rudder bar implies that things could go wrong very, very easily.
And they did, all the time. The book is very clear about the fragility of these machines. They were made of spruce wood, canvas, and piano wire. That's it.
It mentions that structural failure was basically a death sentence.
Right. Engine failure. You might be okay. These planes had big wings. They were essentially powered gliders. If the engine cut out, you could often spiral down to a field and land. But structural failure? A wing snapping off because you turned too hard or hit some turbulence? That was it.
And there were no parachutes in those early days.
No, you just wrote it down.
And yet people kept doing it. And not just experienced engineers. I have to share the story of Henri Felbre from the book. This story just blew my mind.
The story of the flying duck, the hydravian.
Yes, the hydravian.
Yeah.
This was 1910. Henri Felbre wants to build a seaplane. He wants to be the first to take off from water.
Which is incredibly difficult, by the way. Water is sticky. The drag is immense. You need a lot of power to break free.
But here's the kicker, and the book points this out specifically. He had never flown before.
Wait, never flown a plane at all?
Never. He wasn't a pilot. He had never been up in the air in his life. He built a plane. He put it on the water near Marseille. He climbed in.
Right.
And he decided, well, I guess I'm going to be the test pilot.
That is the definition of the pioneering spirit. Or maybe madness.
Probably a healthy dose of both. But he did it. The flying duck took off. It flew for about 500 meters. It's just one of those anecdotes R.G. Grant sprinkles throughout the book that makes you just shake your head in disbelief. These people were operating on pure, unadulterated faith.
And as we move into World War I, that individual bravery gets industrialized. The book describes the era of the Knights of the Air.
This is the era of the Red Baron, the classic dogfights.
Manfred von Richthofen,
Yeah.
Eddie Rickenbacker. These names became legends.
And the text mentions that Charles Lindbergh, when he was a kid growing up in Minnesota, viewed these men like King Arthur's knights. They were jousting in the clouds. It seemed noble, clean. It seemed so far above the mud and the horror of the trenches.
That was the myth. And it was a very powerful myth. It sanitized the war. It gave the public heroes to root for. But R.G. Grant provides a really critical analysis here. He contrasts that legend with the reality.
And what was the reality?
Brief, brutal, nerve-wracked lives. That's the phrase the book uses.
Wow. Brief, brutal, nerve-wracked.
These weren't knights in shining armor. They were freezing, terrified young men in flammable canvas machines that could catch fire at any moment. The book says they were soaked in castor oil from the engines, which gave them terrible diarrhea. They were freezing cold because of the open cockpits at 10,000 feet. And the life expectancy of a new pilot on the front in 1917 was measured in weeks. 3 to 6 weeks.
That phrase really sticks with you. It just cuts right through all the romance. It reminds you that this was still a war machine.
And speaking of war machines and terror, we have to talk about the Zeppelins.
This really shifts us to the dark side of aviation history. The Zeppelin wasn't a knight. It was a monster.
It was the first strategic bomber. Before airplanes could carry heavy loads, these massive, silent airships filled with highly flammable hydrogen would just drift over cities at night.
The book quotes H.G. Wells, who was frighteningly prescient. In his book, The War in the Air, written before the war even started, he predicted ruins and blazing conflagrations.
And that prediction came true over London. The psychological impact of the Zeppelin was huge. It was this silent, hovering threat in the dark.
But they were also incredibly vulnerable. There's a witness account in the book from a woman named Muriel Darrell Browning. She saw a Zeppelin get shot down over London.
It's a haunting image she describes.
She describes it as a cone of blazing wreckage.
A cone of blazing wreckage. You can just see it. A massive airship the size of an ocean liner filled with hydrogen just turning into a falling sun.
It really underscores how quickly aviation went from this age of envy and just watching birds to a mechanism of absolute terror.
Yeah.
In less than 15 years, we went from, look, it flies, to run for your lives, it's a bomber.
So the war ends. The survivors come home, and we enter Section 4, the golden age heroism and hubris.
The roaring 20s and the 30s.
Yeah.
The era of the barnstormers.
These were the unemployed pilots from WWI. They had nothing but their skills in these cheap surplus airplanes. The book says you could buy a Curtiss Jenny trainer, still in the crate, for just a few $100s.
And they toured small-town America. The visual details Grant provides are just wild. Wing walkers bracing themselves to leap between planes mid-air.
Playing tennis on the wings.
It sounds like a circus.
It absolutely was a circus, but the expert insight in the book is really interesting here. Grant argues that while this kept aviation in the public eye, it actually hindered the development of commercial aviation.
How so?
Well, think about it. It reinforced the public belief that airplanes were fundamentally dangerous. If the only time you ever saw a plane was when some guy was hanging off the wing by his teeth or deliberately crashing into a barn for applause, you probably weren't thinking, you know, I should put my grandmother on one of those to visit the coast.
That makes total sense. It made it look like a stunt, not a form of transportation. It branded aviation as something for daredevils, not for normal people.
Exactly. And to change that perception, aviation needed to conquer the oceans. We needed the Atlantic Challenge.
This is one of the best sections of the book. The race to fly nonstop from New York to Paris for the Orteig Prize.
And this brings us to a tale of two pilots. R.G. Grant sets up this incredible contrast between René Fonck and Charles Lindbergh. And it's a lesson in design philosophy that really applies to almost anything.
Let's start with René Fonck. It's 1926. He's a French war ace, the ace of aces. Shot down more planes than anyone else on the Allied side. He wants to win this prize.
So he teams up with Igor Sikorsky to build the S-35. It's a massive three-engine plane. But Fonck just fell into the trap of hubris.
He did. He didn't just want to cross the Atlantic, he wanted to cross it in style.
The details the book gives about the S-35's interior, I couldn't believe it when I read it.
Red leather upholstery.
Red leather. In an airplane in 1926 where every single ounce matters.
And a bed.
A bed.
Bed.
Yes. They added all these fixtures, luxuries, comforts. He even insisted on carrying a radio operator and a mechanic. They treated it like it was a flying hotel room.
And what was the result of all that luxury?
The plane was too heavy. It was grossly overweight. On takeoff at Roosevelt Field, it just couldn't lift. The landing gear collapsed under the weight. It cartwheeled into a gully at the end of the runway and burst into a fireball. 2 of his crew members died.
What a tragedy. That's such a practical lesson.
Prioritizing luxury over function, hubris over physics, he tried to tell the airplane what to do rather than listening to what the airplane needed to do the job.
And then, in contrast, you have Charles Lindbergh.
The spirit of St. Louis.
And the contrast could not be sharper. Fonck had a bed. Lindbergh was literally cutting the extra paper off his maps to save weight.
He was. He cut the margins off his charts. He refused to carry a radio because it was too heavy and unreliable. He sat on a little wicker chair because it was lighter than a metal one. He didn't even have a forward window. The main fuel tank was right in front of his face to keep the center of gravity correct.
So how did he see?
He had to use a periscope to see forward. He stripped that plane down to the absolute bare essentials.
Yep.
Just fuel, an engine, and a pilot.
There's a quote from Lindbergh in the book that just captures his mindset perfectly. He's out over the ocean, alone.
He said, "Here, all around me, is the Atlantic. Its expanse, its depth, its power. If my plane can stay aloft, then so can I."
If my plane can stay aloft, then so can I. It's that symbiotic relationship between the man and the machine. He wasn't trying to conquer the Atlantic with luxury. He was trying to survive it with endurance. He was serving the machine.
And he did. He landed at Le Bourget Field in Paris, the Lone Eagle. The global obsession with him was massive. It was the first truly global media event.
But R.G. Grant reminds us of the cost. This heroic age wasn't free.
Not at all. The book just lists the lost pioneers. The oceans are full of them.
Amelia Earhart, Sean Mermoz, Wiley Post.
The book calls it an awesome waste of young lives.
That's such a heavy phrase. Awesome waste.
The romance required that sacrifice. Every mile of progress, every new route that was opened up was bought with blood. We look back at the black and white photos and we see the smiles and the leather jackets, but the mortality rate was just terrifying.
But that sacrifice, as brutal as it was, paved the way for Section 5, the shrinking world and commercial aviation.
This is where we go from pure adventure to actual transportation, where the airplane finally stops being a stunt and starts being a bus.
There's a quote from Claude Graham White in 1914 that really sets the stage for this. He said, "What railways have done for nations, airways will do for the world."
And he was absolutely right. Aviation became the nervous system of the planet.
And Wendell Willkie's pronouncement during World War II, which the book highlights, really drives this home. There are no distant places any longer. The world is small and the world is one.
That is the big psychological shift. Before flight, the other side of the world was an abstraction. It was a story you read in a book. After flight, it was a destination. It was a place you could be tomorrow.
But the early days of commercial flight were, well, they were exotic.
Yeah.
And sometimes very jarring. The book tells this anecdote about Imperial Airways flying the Handley Page HP-42 in Africa.
This is a great story. It really illustrates the clash of different eras.
They're flying over the Nile in the 1930s. This is a massive 4-engine biplane. It looked like a flying cathedral. And the book describes the reaction of the Dinka tribe women in Sudan.
They're walking along the riverbank carrying water, and as this massive flying boat roars overhead, the text says they turned their heads away gravely.
They didn't even look up.
No, they looked away. Deliberately.
That's so profound. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a powerful cultural contrast. This machine was so alien, so completely outside their context, that the reaction wasn't curiosity. It was avoidance. It was an intrusion. It was something that didn't belong in their world, so they simply refused to acknowledge its existence.
It really paints the picture of two worlds colliding. The ancient world and the modern world, meeting at 100 miles per hour over the Nile.
And then the acceleration just goes vertical. The jet age,
The stats in the book are mind-blowing. We go from, 47 miles per hour in 1909
which is slower than a modern car on a highway,
to Mach 9.6 with the X-43A scramjet in 2004.
and the range. The Boeing 747 raised the nonstop range to over 6,000 miles.
The 747, the queen of the skies. That plane really democratized travel, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It made international travel affordable for millions. Before the 747, flying was for the jet set, the wealthy, the famous. After the 747, it was for families, for students, for everyone. It shrank the world for the common person.
And we can't forget cargo. The book has these incredible pictures of the Airbus Beluga.
Carrying over 50 tons of cargo, it looks like a whale, literally. It has that massive bulbous forehead.
It does, hence the name. But it just shows that flight became utility. It became how we move things, not just how we dream of moving.
Which brings us to the final section, Section 6. The future of flight and reflection.
And R.G. Grant doesn't just look back, he looks at the frontiers.
He discusses the NASA Helios.
This is a solar-powered flying wing. It looks like a giant thin ruler just floating in the sky. It's beautiful and eerie.
And here is where we get this beautiful thematic connection right back to the very start of our conversation. Remember Icarus.
Died because he flew too close to the sun.
Exactly. Icarus flew too close to the sun, the wax melted, and he died. The sun was the enemy. The NASA Helios flies because of the sun. It uses solar power to stay aloft for months at a time.
That is an amazing, ironic inversion of the myth.
Hmm.
We have mastered the very force that destroyed Icarus.
It just shows how far we've come. We aren't fighting the elements anymore. We're learning to harness them.
But there are new challenges. The book is very clear about the ecological impact.
Emissions, noise pollution, these are the modern battles. And the book notes a fundamental shift in airline priorities. We used to care about pure speed, the Concorde.
I miss the idea of the Concorde. London to New York in 3 hours, sipping champagne at Mach 2.
It was incredibly glamorous. But it wasn't sustainable. It burned too much fuel. It made too much noise. Now the priority is efficiency and capacity. The Airbus A380, moving more people with less fuel per person.
It's a more mature approach to flight. We're thinking about the planet now, not just the speed record.
It is. But the text suggests that even though flight has become a business, a utility, the magical achievement remains.
It really does. I still get a little thrill every time the wheels leave the runway. That moment of weightlessness.
R.G. Grant closes with a quote from the poet-pilot John McGee. It's one of the most famous poems in all of aviation. High flight.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth.
And danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds. And it goes on to talk about treading the high, untrespassed sanctity of space.
Beautiful.
It reminds us that even when you're inside a crowded economy-class cabin, eating peanuts, watching a movie,
Yeah.
you are doing something that Leonardo da Vinci only dreamed of. You are sitting in a chair in the sky.
So let's wrap this up with a practical application. What is the lesson of the book for you?
For me, it's about the realization of the impossible. The book makes this point so clearly. To the Wright brothers, an Airbus A380 would have been literally beyond imagination. Not just technically difficult, unimaginable. A metal ship weighing 1 million pounds carrying 500 people across an ocean. It would have sounded like sorcery.
But we got there.
We got there through iterative, often dangerous, painful progress, step by step. Wavy, creeping flights leading eventually to supersonic jets.
And the book mentions the Cessna pilots flying in New Guinea.
Navigating the trackless wilderness.
I love that phrase, trackless wilderness.
So the challenge for you listening is this. What is the trackless wilderness in your life? What is the thing that seems literally beyond imagination right now? Because if this history proves anything, it's that with enough persistence and maybe a gray business suit and a golf cap like Wilbur, you can navigate it.
I love that. So I have to ask the audience, which figure from Flight, The Complete History of Aviation, resonates most with you? Are you the careful, methodical businessman like Wilbur Wright, checking every detail, ignoring the mockers? Or are you the daredevil barnstormer, wing-walking and taking huge risks?
It's a good question. I think we all have a bit of both in us, or we need a bit of both. We need the Wilbur to build the solid foundation and the barnstormer to push the limits of what's possible.
I want to strongly, strongly encourage you to go out and purchase this book, Flight, The Complete History of Aviation, DK Definitive Visual Histories by R.G. Grant.
We've talked about the stories, but we haven't been able to show you the pictures. And this is a DK book. The visuals are everything. They're half the story.
The photos of the Wright Flyer, the cutaway layouts of the cockpits, the sheer scale of the Airbus Beluga. You need to see it. It is something this podcast can't fully capture. You need to see the texture of the canvas on those early wings, the oil stains on the leather helmets.
Definitely. It belongs on your coffee table. It's a book you can open to any page and just get completely lost in for an hour.
And please, find R.G. Grant and the publisher, DK, on social media. Tell them you heard about the book on the Playing Books podcast. Express your appreciation for them preserving this incredible history.
It is a history worth preserving. It's our modern mythology.
Thank you so much for spending an hour with us and this incredible material.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast with a friend.
It really helps us spread the word.
And we will leave you with one final thought. Flight didn't just open up the skies. It opened up a world of ideas. It proved that gravity is just a suggestion, if you have enough speed.
Keep looking up.
See you next time.